Rocco Marino had 3 absolute rules. Never spare a traitor, never bring syndicate blood into his home, and never touch the staff. He broke them all the night his mansion smelled of smoke, and the curvy Nanny stood over an unconscious assassin, gripping a scorched cast-iron skillet. Chicago was a city built on ice and blood, and Rocco Marino ruled the coldest parts of it. As the head of the Marino Syndicate, he operated with a ruthless efficiency that left the authorities grasping at shadows and rival families burying empty caskets. He kept his life strictly compartmentalized. The violence stayed on the streets, managed from dimly lit warehouses in the meatpacking district. His sprawling estate on the Gold Coast was a sanctuary, maintained for one reason only: his orphaned 5-year-old niece, Mia. Rocco had rules for the estate. No weapons in the living areas, no mob lieutenants past the foyer, and the Nanny was to remain invisible, efficient, and strictly professional. Enter Valentina Romano. When the agency sent Valentina, Rocco had almost sent her back. She did not fit the sterile, rigid mold of the severe governesses he usually hired. Valentina was soft where they were sharp, with generous curves that tested the seams of her modest dresses, thick dark hair that always seemed to escape its sensible bun, and a quiet warmth that thawed the freezing corridors of the mansion. She was plus-sized, beautiful in a way that made Rocco clench his jaw, and entirely too vibrant for his dark world. But Mia had clung to her on the first day, and Rocco, a man who had ordered executions without a blink, found himself unable to deny the child. He told himself he would ignore Valentina. He told himself she was just an employee. But his eyes lingered on the sway of her hips when she walked down the hall, and the soft, musical sound of her laugh drifted into his study, grating against his iron-clad control. Then came the night of the kitchen fire. Rocco was miles away, sitting across from a cartel distributor in a high-rise hotel, when his phone buzzed with an emergency alert from the estate security system. The cameras had been cut. The perimeter was breached. Rocco left the distributor mid-sentence, his security detail scrambling to keep up as he drove his armored SUV through the slick, rain-soaked streets of Chicago like a madman. His chest was tight with a terror he had not felt since the day his brother was murdered. Desmond Kessler. The name echoed in Rocco's mind like a death knell. Kessler was a vicious upstart, a rogue operator who had been trying to carve out a piece of the Marino territory. Rocco had underestimated Kessler's audacity. To strike at the estate was a suicide mission, but Kessler only needed to get lucky once. When Rocco kicked open the heavy oak doors of his mansion, the air was thick with grey smoke. The piercing shriek of fire alarms shattered the silence. He drew his weapon, his men fanning out behind him, expecting to find a massacre. The smell of burning grease and scorched meat hung heavy in the air, leading him toward the massive gourmet kitchen. Rocco rounded the corner, his gun raised, and froze. The kitchen island was engulfed in flames, the fire licking at the copper vents above. But it was not an accident. The gas lines had been deliberately tampered with, and on the marble floor lay 2 men in black tactical gear. One was groaning, clutching a face that looked like it had been severely burned by boiling oil. The other was out cold, a massive dent in his combat helmet. Standing between the downed men and the pantry door was Valentina. She was breathing heavily, her apron smeared with soot and blood. She gripped a heavy cast-iron skillet like a weapon of war. Her eyes, usually so warm and gentle, were wild and feral. Behind her, tucked safely in the reinforced pantry, was Mia. Valentina had not panicked. When Kessler's assassins had slipped past the compromised guards and entered the kitchen to stage a gas explosion, she had not cowered. Valentina had grown up in the brutal neighborhoods of the South Side. She knew what men with dead eyes looked like. She had intentionally thrown a pot of hot frying oil onto the open flame, creating a localized inferno that blinded the first attacker, before bringing the skillet down on the second man's skull with bone-crunching force. Rocco lowered his gun, his heart hammering a violent rhythm against his ribs. He looked at the wreckage of his kitchen, the neutralized assassins, and the curvy, beautiful woman who had just defended his bloodline with a frying pan. Valentina dropped the skillet. It hit the floor with a heavy clang. She looked at Rocco, her chest heaving, the adrenaline finally crashing. "They tried to hurt her," Valentina whispered, her voice trembling but laced with absolute steel. "I wasn't going to let them." In that moment, the cold, impenetrable wall Rocco had built around his heart shattered. The rule about keeping the nanny invisible vanished into the smoke. He did not see an employee. He saw a queen. He saw a woman who belonged by his side in his dark, violent world. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, pulling her into his chest. Valentina gasped, her soft curves pressing against the hard lines of his tailored suit and the Kevlar vest beneath it. He buried his face in her hair, smelling smoke, vanilla, and the intoxicating scent of her raw courage. "You are safe," Rocco murmured, his voice a dark, rough rasp. He looked over her shoulder at the bleeding assassin on the floor, his eyes turning to dead, cold obsidian. "Clean this up," he ordered his men, "and keep him alive. I have questions." The aftermath of the attack shifted the entire dynamic of the Marino estate. Rocco refused to let Valentina leave the property, dismissing her half-hearted protests that she should find another job now that the house was a war zone. He doubled the guard, fortified the perimeter, and moved Valentina out of the staff quarters and into the suite directly across from his own master bedroom. Valentina tried to maintain the boundaries of their professional relationship, but the lines were irrevocably blurred. Rocco was no longer the distant employer who communicated through curt nods and envelopes of cash. He was a constant, looming presence. He watched her. When she sat in the garden with Mia, Rocco stood by the glass doors, his dark eyes tracking every movement she made. He noticed the way the sunlight caught the rich tones of her skin, the way her full lips curved into a smile, and the protective way she constantly kept herself between Mia and any open space. He was obsessed. The men in his syndicate whispered about it. The ruthless Rocco Marino, a man who viewed women as temporary distractions, was rearranging his entire security apparatus around a plus-sized nanny from the South Side. Desmond Kessler, however, was not easily deterred. Down in the sound-proofed basement of a Marino warehouse, Rocco had extracted everything he needed from the surviving assassin before putting a bullet in his head. Kessler was operating out of an abandoned rail yard in the industrial district, pooling resources with a fractured Irish mob. Kessler knew he had failed to kill the niece, but he had learned something far more valuable from his inside men. He learned that Rocco Marino had a new weakness. Valentina felt the shift in Rocco, the tightly coiled tension radiating from him whenever he returned from the city. She knew who he was. She had always known. You did not grow up where she did, without recognizing the aura of a man who dealt in death. Yet she felt no fear of him. When Rocco looked at her, his gaze was heavy with a possessive heat that made her pulse race and her skin flush. One night, 2 weeks after the kitchen fire, Rocco returned to the estate long past midnight. Valentina had been unable to sleep. The house felt too quiet, the shadows too long. She padded down the sweeping staircase in her silk robe, heading for the kitchen to get a glass of water. She found Rocco sitting in the dark at the massive dining table. The only light came from the moon spilling through the tall windows. He had taken off his suit jacket and unbuttoned his shirt. The scent of copper and gunpowder hit her senses before she even saw the blood. Valentina gasped, rushing to his side. A deep, jagged slash ran across his left bicep, bleeding sluggishly, and his knuckles were split and raw. "I told the guards to keep everyone upstairs," Rocco growled, though his voice lacked its usual bite. He looked exhausted, the shadows under his eyes heavy and dark. "I am not everyone," Valentina said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She did not retreat. Instead, she moved to the hidden first aid kit in the pantry, a kit she had mentally catalogued on her first day. She brought it to the table, her hands steady as she opened it. "Valentina, go to bed," Rocco warned, his muscles tensing as she stepped into his personal space. "You do not need to see this." "I have seen worse, Mr. Marino," she replied quietly. "Rocco," he corrected, his eyes locking onto hers. "Call me Rocco." She swallowed hard, nodding. "Rocco." Valentina cleaned the wound with alcohol. Rocco did not flinch, but his breathing hitched as her soft, warm fingers braced his muscular arm. She was so close, he could feel the heat radiating from her lush body. He could see the rapid pulse beating at the base of her throat. She took a curved needle and surgical thread, and with surprising expertise, began to stitch the laceration. "Where did you learn to do this?" Rocco asked, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "My older brother ran with a bad crowd when we were teenagers," Valentina said softly, keeping her eyes on her work. "He could not go to the hospital when he got hurt. I had to learn. I lost him anyway, but the skill stayed." Rocco reached up with his uninjured arm, his large, calloused hand wrapping around her waist. He pulled her a fraction of an inch closer, burying his face against her stomach. Valentina froze, the needle pausing in her hand. The most dangerous man in Chicago was resting his head against her curves, seeking a comfort she never knew he needed. "You are too good for this house, Valentina," he murmured against her silk robe. "But I am a selfish man. I will never let you leave." Valentina finished the last stitch, tying it off and snipping the thread. She looked down at his dark hair. She reached out, her fingers gently threading through his thick hair. It was a silent surrender, an acknowledgement of the invisible tether pulling them together. Rocco tilted his head back, looking up at her with eyes that promised both heaven and hell. He stood up slowly, towering over her. He cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "Kessler made a move tonight," Rocco said, his tone shifting back to the cold mafia boss. "He hit one of my shipments. He thinks he can bleed me out." Rocco leaned down, his lips hovering barely an inch from hers. "He thinks I am distracted because of you. He thinks you are a liability." Valentina did not pull away. She tilted her chin up, her soft curves pressing against his chest, her dark eyes flashing with defiance. "Then you have to show him exactly what happens when someone underestimates the Marino family." Rocco let out a dark, approving chuckle. He crushed his mouth against hers, kissing her with a desperate, punishing hunger that wiped away any lingering doubt. Valentina responded with equal fervor, her hands gripping his broad shoulders, pulling him closer as the shadows of the Chicago underworld closed in around them. Desmond Kessler had no idea the fire he had started, nor the lengths Rocco Marino would go to protect his curvy, fearless queen. The kiss ignited a fire far more dangerous than the one that had scorched the estate kitchen. For Rocco Marino, the taste of Valentina Romano was a revelation. It stripped away the cold, calculating machine he had been forced to become and awakened the primal, fiercely protective man beneath. But in the underworld of Chicago, A distracted boss was a dead boss. Rocco knew this, and Desmond Kessler was banking on it. By morning, the Marino syndicate was fully mobilized. The opulent estate transformed into a military command center. Armored SUVs chewed up the gravel driveway, and men with heavy artillery secured the perimeter. Rocco moved Valentina and Mia to the panic room wing of the house, a subterranean fortress equipped with steel-reinforced doors and an independent ventilation system. Valentina hated the cage, even a gilded one, but she understood the necessity. She kept Mia occupied with coloring books and stories, projecting a calm serenity she did not truly feel. Her mind was racing. Growing up on the South Side had taught her to read the atmosphere of a room, to spot the subtle shifts in behavior that signaled impending violence. Rocco came to check on them before he left to hunt Kessler. He stepped into the bunker, dressed in a black tactical sweater and combat trousers, a heavy holster strapped to his thigh. He looked every inch the ruthless cartel kingpin the city feared. But when his eyes landed on Valentina, the lethal edge in his expression softened, melting into a deep, consuming heat. He approached her, his large hands cupping her waist, his thumbs tracing the generous curve of her hips. "I have a location," Rocco said, his voice a low, gravelly hum. "Kessler is holed up in a derelict shipping yard on the Calumet River. He is trying to rally the remnants of his Irish mob allies. I am going to cut the head off the snake before it can strike again." Valentina looked up at him, her dark eyes scanning his harsh, beautiful face. "Promise me, you will not underestimate him, Rocco. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. I only have one weakness, Valentina," he murmured, leaning down to press a hard, lingering kiss to her lips. "And she is locked behind a foot of titanium steel. Do not open this door for anyone but me." When the heavy steel door slammed shut and the locking mechanisms engaged, Valentina felt a profound sense of isolation. She turned to the bank of security monitors on the wall, which displayed live feeds of the estate's exterior and the upper floors. For 3 hours, the house was a tomb. Then she noticed something wrong. One of the men assigned to guard the corridor leading to the bunker stairs was pacing erratically. His name was Silas, a newer recruit to the Marino family. Valentina watched him on the screen. He kept checking his watch, his hand hovering over his earpiece, his eyes darting toward the security cameras. It was the body language of a man drowning in guilt and adrenaline. Valentina remembered the stories her older brother used to tell her about syndicate wars. The most effective way to breach an impenetrable fortress was not to break down the walls, but to buy the man holding the keys. "Mia, sweetie," Valentina said, her voice steady and warm. "I need you to put on your noise-cancelling headphones and watch your movie on the tablet. Turn it up nice and loud for me, okay?" Once Mia was safely engrossed in her cartoon, Valentina moved to the control panel. She overrode the audio feed for the hallway camera, turning up the volume. Silas was whispering frantically into his radio. "The boss is gone," Silas muttered, his voice trembling. "The strike team is at the Calumet River." "Yeah, I have the override codes for the bunker. But you have to guarantee me safe passage out of Chicago. Kessler promised me $1 million. Valentina felt the blood freeze in her veins. The raid on the Calumet River was a trap, a decoy, meant to draw Rocco and his heaviest hitters away from the estate. Kessler was not at the shipping yard. He was coming here. She did not panic. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. Valentina opened the emergency communications channel, sending a priority encrypted ping directly to Rocco's satellite phone. Then she looked around the bunker. She had to deal with Silas before Kessler's men breached the gates. If Silas inputted the override codes, the steel doors would open, and she and Mia would be defenseless. Valentina grabbed a heavy CO2 fire extinguisher from the wall and positioned herself flat against the wall, right beside the bunker door. She hit the intercom button. "Silas," Valentina called out, injecting a perfectly feigned tone of distress into her voice. "Silas, please help. Mia is having a severe allergic reaction. I need her EpiPen from the medical wing upstairs. Please open the door." On the monitor, she saw Silas hesitate. A sick, greedy calculation crossed his face. If he opened the door now, he could secure the hostages for Kessler without waiting for the strike team. "Stand back, I am opening the door," Silas replied. The hydraulic locks hissed. The massive steel door slowly swung outward. Silas stepped into the bunker, his hand resting on his sidearm, expecting to find a weeping Nanny and a sick child. He never saw the fire extinguisher coming. Using the momentum of her entire body, Valentina swung the heavy metal cylinder like a baseball bat. It connected with the side of Silas's head with a sickening crack. The traitor crumpled to the floor instantly, completely unconscious. Valentina dropped the extinguisher, grabbed Silas by the collar of his tactical vest, and dragged his dead weight out into the hallway. She lunged back inside the bunker and slammed her hand on the lockdown button. The titanium doors sealed shut once more, locking the traitor outside. She stared at the monitor, her chest heaving as the front gates of the Marino estate suddenly exploded on the screen. Kessler's men had arrived. Miles away, at the Calumet River shipping yard, the air was thick with the stench of stagnant water and old rust. Rocco and his strike team had silently neutralized the perimeter guards and breached the central warehouse. But instead of finding a command center bustling with rival mobsters, they found a hollow shell. The warehouse was completely empty, save for a single burner phone sitting on an old wooden crate. Rocco stared at the phone, a cold dread pooling in his stomach. Just as he reached for it, his own satellite phone vibrated violently against his ribs. It was the emergency ping from the bunker. "He played me," Rocco roared, his voice echoing off the corrugated iron roof. "Fall back, all units. Fall back to the estate immediately. Drive like the devil himself is chasing you." The drive back to the Gold Coast was an agonizing blur of swoons and screeching tires. Rocco's mind was consumed by visions of smoke and blood. If Kessler laid a single finger on Valentina or Mia, Rocco vowed to burn the entire city of Chicago to the ground. When Rocco's convoy smashed through the ruined front gates of his estate, the grounds were a war zone. The remaining Marino guards were engaged in a brutal firefight with Kessler's mercenaries. Rocco did not wait for the vehicle to stop. He kicked the door open while the SUV was still moving, his assault rifle raised, his eyes fixed on the front doors of his mansion. Rocco moved like a reaper. He and his lieutenants carved a path of utter devastation through Kessler's ranks. There was no mercy, no hesitation. The Marino boss was a force of pure, lethal fury. He breached the main foyer, stepping over the shattered glass and ruined marble. At the end of the grand hallway, near the entrance to the bunker wing, stood Desmond Kessler. Kessler was bleeding from a graze on his shoulder, screaming orders at two of his men who were frantically trying to hack the electronic keypad of the bunker doors. Beside them, Silas lay groaning on the floor, clutching his bleeding head. Kessler turned, his eyes widening as he saw Rocco standing at the end of the hall, the barrel of his rifle smoking. "It is over, Desmond," Rocco said, his voice chillingly calm, carrying over the echoes of gunfire outside. Kessler pulled a sidearm, a desperate, wild look in his eyes. "You are too late, Marino. My men are overriding the system right now. I am going to take your niece, and I am going to take that pretty, thick nanny of yours, and I am going to make them both disappear." Rocco did not raise his voice. He did not blink. He simply lowered his rifle, letting it hang on its tactical sling, and drew his heavy, customized sidearm. "You underestimate the women in my house, Kessler," Rocco said. A high-pitched beep echoed through the hallway. Kessler grinned in triumph, thinking his men had cracked the code. But the sound had not come from the keypad. It had come from the ceiling above them. Inside the bunker, Valentina had accessed the estate's automated defense protocols. She had triggered the Halon gas fire suppression system in that specific corridor. With a deafening hiss, the ceiling vents dumped a massive cloud of heavy, oxygen-depriving gas directly onto Kessler and his men. The hackers immediately dropped to their knees, coughing violently, their eyes streaming. Kessler stumbled backward, dropping his gun, clutching his throat as the air was sucked from his lungs. Rocco walked calmly through the dissipating white cloud, immune to the chaos he commanded. He kicked Kessler's gun away. He looked down at the rival boss. Rocco raised his weapon. "This is for stepping foot in my home," Rocco said coldly. He pulled the trigger once. Desmond Kessler stopped moving. The silence that followed was absolute. Rocco ordered his men to clear the remaining mercenaries and drag the bodies out. He stood before the steel doors of the bunker, holstering his weapon. He pressed his hand flat against the cold metal. "Valentina," he called out, his voice hoarse. "It is me. It is clear." The hydraulic locks disengaged. The heavy door swung open. Valentina stood there, her hair disheveled, her clothes rumpled, but her chin was held high. Behind her, Mia was still happily watching her movie, oblivious to the massacre that had just occurred above her head. Rocco stepped into the bunker. He looked at the security monitors, seeing the neutralized hackers and the defeated Silas. He looked back at Valentina, understanding exactly what she had done. She had outsmarted them all. She had held the line. "You are terrifying," Rocco breathed, closing the distance between them. "You said you wanted a woman who could handle your world," Valentina whispered, a weary but triumphant smile touching her lips. "I told you I wasn't going to let them hurt my family. My family." The words struck Rocco like a physical blow. He wrapped his arms around her lush, curvy body, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the sweet, living scent of her. She was soft, yielding, and yet she possessed a spine of absolute titanium. She was the perfect counterweight to his darkness. "You are never working as a nanny again," Rocco declared, his lips brushing against her jawline. Valentina arched an eyebrow, her hands sliding up his broad chest to loop around his neck. "Oh? Are you firing me, Mr. Marino?" "No," Rocco said, lifting his head to meet her gaze, his dark eyes blazing with undeniable devotion. "I am promoting you. You are going to run this house. You are going to run me. You are the Donna of the Marino Syndicate now, Valentina. And heaven help anyone who ever tries to cross you." He kissed her, sealing the promise in blood and ash. The cold mafia boss had finally found his queen, and together they would rule Chicago, unstoppable and perfectly matched, long after the fires burned out. Wow, what a wild ride. If you love this intense, gritty story of a ruthless mafia boss finally meeting his match in a fearless, curvy queen, you absolutely have to let me know. Hit that like button, drop a comment below telling me your favorite moment between Rocco and Valentina, and share this video with your fellow dark romance lovers. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another high-stakes story. See you in the next one.